Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's webinar, Meeting the Needs of the Dynamic Meeting Room, brought to you by Enterprise Connect, Nureva Inc., and UBM. I'm Michelle Burbick, Associate Editor of No Jitter and Program Coordinator for Enterprise Connect, and I'll be your moderator today. We have just a few announcements before we begin. This webinar is designed to be interactive between you and our presenters. We will ask for your feedback later in the presentation. You can participate in the Q&A session by asking questions at any time during the presentation. Just type your question into the Ask a Question text area located below the media player, then click the Submit button. We will answer as many questions as time permits at the end of the presentation. Slides will advance automatically throughout the event. You may also download a copy of the slides by clicking on the Download Slide button located below the presentation window. At this time, we recommend you disable your pop-up blockers. If you are experiencing any technical problems, please visit our webinar help guide by clicking on the Help link below the video window. In addition, you can contact our technical support helpline, which is also located in the webinar help guide. If slides are not advancing, press your F5 key to refresh your console. Now on to the presentation. Meeting the Needs of the Dynamic Meeting Room. Discussing today's webinar will be Phil Edholm, President and Principal at PKE Consulting, and David Martin, Co-founder, Chairman, and Chief Technology Officer at Nureva Inc. First today, we'll hear from Phil.
Good morning. Welcome, everyone. Today we're going to talk a bit about how you meet the needs of the new dynamic meeting room, this transformation that's happening in how we communicate and how we collaborate. To do that, what I'd like to do is to focus on a few specific topics today. A bit about why audio is so important, what's changing in the meeting room, how is the meeting room changing, a bit of how those experiences are, the in-room experience versus the remote, and then talk about some new technology, something that really impressed me about how you can transform the meeting room. So first, let's talk about voice. So, it's very interesting. If you go to any event, I was at Enterprise Connect this year, you see all these new ways of collaborating, video, doing presentations, screen sharing, editing documents, brainstorming, all these tools, whiteboards. But the key to this is that the reality of communication and collaboration is that the voice, human interaction using voice, is really the way we communicate. And I would argue that voice is the foundation of collaboration. We may do some interactions using text, but if you stop and think about those interactions, they're actually fairly minimal in terms of content and value. Where do you want to go to have lunch? When we get into those discussions that are really about how we do things, about how we work, how we interact, audio and voice communication is the critical aspect. And in fact, if we look at some history of collaboration, I've been studying this for many years, we actually find that there are some pretty good indications that voice is the key to successful collaboration. So this is actually based on some work done by Alfonso Chapanis, generally recognized as the grandfather of machine-human interaction. He was trying to show what ways machines could interact with human beings, and he did it because he didn't have machines that could interact back in the 70s when this was done. He did it by putting a sender of information and a seeker of information into two rooms and varying the interface between the rooms. So he started off with typing on a teletype machine, then on a handwriting machine, and eventually he introduced audio and finally opened up a curtain that actually was a window between the rooms to simulate video. What he found was that if you repeated a test, put the parts for a barbecue in one room and the instructions in the other room and had the two people try to communicate on how to complete the task, that the time to completion of tasks dropped about 70% when he introduced voice. So his conclusion was when you talk about task interactions, voice is critical. I always love the adage, a picture says 1,000 words, but the reality is the picture only says 1,000 words. You can't tell information that's not readily apparent in the picture. So, that ability to question and say, who's the third person on the left in the picture adds significant value. Another very important study about communication and collaboration is some work that was done many, many years ago about how people communicate. And what that actually developed was this concept that words and content are only about 7% of the value of communication. It turns out body language and visual perception is over 50%. This is why video has become so popular. But the thing that most people have not recognized is that 35% of the value of communication is actually in tonality and how we say things. How I say things. Do I sound angry? I'm very upset. Or do I sound happy? Am I trying to make a point, or is it just something in passing? All of these are conveyed not necessarily with the words, but with how we say them. So it turns out that it's not just about audio. It's about the quality of the audio and the ability to discern these critical events and critical elements within communication. So let's talk about how we've extended audio beyond the phone call. Phone calls have been around for a lot of years. And we've, over the years, tried to extend that audio experience to people that are not on a handset with a phone set. The first was the speakerphone. Well, I remember this from Charlie's Angels. This was made famous by that, the original AT&T speakerphone. The reality is it was great if you were sitting at a desk with one or two people, but really didn't work in a room. So then we introduced the concept of the bat phone, the phone on the table with 3 speakers and able to do the table. The problem, of course, is that if the table is long, the people at the end of the table can't be heard, so we introduced the concept of multiple microphones on the table. But the reality is that became a problem because the mics themselves were a challenge. So since then, we've continued to introduce new technologies to try to capture the audio in a room. This may be multiple microphones on the table. It may be ceiling microphones. The challenge is with all of these communication capabilities, all these microphone systems together, communications, they're all really focused on the seating space. So whether the microphones are on the table or on the ceiling, they're actually designed to essentially capture what people are saying while they're sitting at a table. They're not designed for the room, they're designed for the table. And the challenge with that is that coverage area begins to become a problem as meetings change. So, if you think about what's happening today in your average meeting, it's not about us sitting around a table. We now have new tools. We have touch screens. We have whiteboards that can be transmitted. We actually begin to interact in different ways. Meetings are much more dynamic in terms of how people interact in the room. And the room structures themselves have changed. We no longer have this concept of a boardroom with a table in the middle, but you actually may have multiple seating positions, different locations, people moving around. The net result is that the room is what's important, not the table today. And this has become a critical challenge because as the conversations in the room move away from the table, for the people that are participating in this session that are not in the room, how do we convey that information in an effective way? And one way you can kind of think about this is to think about meetings. So, if you think about that room, used to be there are people sitting around the table, but now we have people seated, away from the table. They may be seated along the wall. Maybe people standing at the back of the room. Those people, while they may not be active in the conversation, may occasionally be called upon to make a comment or interact as part of the conversation. The other thing is that we often have someone at the front of the room presenting. And typically this person is not close to the table. And often you hear this, you have the presenter, can you get the mic closer to the presenter? I can't hear the presenter. However, the biggest challenge today, I think, are these new tools that allow us to essentially work the walls. So instead of us being at the table, looking at the table, if we've got a touch screen, we've got a smart board, even if we've got a whiteboard and we're just using the simple paradigm of pointing a camera towards that so you can actually see the whiteboard, we now have people that are not standing at the table, and actually what's even worse is they're often not even facing the table. They may be facing away from the table, and what they're saying may be of consequence. The result of this is really one of the big challenges we face today in our communication environment, and that is that the audio coverage areas in the rooms, because they're focused to the table, speakers on the table, microphones on the table, they tend to not do well for those participants that are not seated at the table, or when the conversation and the actions in the room move away from the table, for example, to a brainstorming session or a real discussion or talking about something that's being written on a smart board. If you then think about what does this mean, for a remote user, the experience is generally and often very bad. How many times have you been on a conference call where there are two speakers and you can hear one speaker but you can barely hear the second speaker? And when the second speaker makes a comment, the question is from people on the remote locations, please repeat that. I can't hear that. I can't understand it. But in fact, that's just half of the problem. The other half of the problem is that this often results in a bad in-room experience as well, because what happens is we constrain the structure of the meeting and the progress of the meeting for people being able to interact, to a microphone. Can you have somebody move closer to the microphone so that people that are remote can hear that conversation, can actually understand it? So this is becoming more and more a real challenge to how we operate and how we manage and communicate. The real problem when you look at that is that when voice fails, collaboration fails. So, if you stop and think about it for a second, imagine a video conference without sound, without audio. Clearly, if you can imagine that for a moment, you understand that the conversation, the collaboration is not going to go very far without audio. Imagine for a moment what we're doing today, this webinar, that if you did not have my voice to go along with the slides and all you were seeing was the slides, would you be able to discern the message that I'm giving and the value? The value is in the words. The value is enhanced and remembered by graphics and icons, but really what we say, how we interact, is how we collaborate and how we generate ideas and conversations. And the reality is, in many instances, the audio is failing us to be able to provide adequate meetings, to be able to provide that comprehension, to be able to engage people that are remote. And clearly, more and more people are remote, and more meetings are actually dynamic. We're actually using these tools that we're developing for collaboration to more effectively interact, more effectively develop our ideas, develop our concepts. So the question then becomes, how do we manage to deliver quality audio in these new dynamic meeting room environments? And quite frankly, I think there's a really exciting solution. At Enterprise Connect, I was walking around this year, and one of the things I always do when I'm at Enterprise Connect is I look for things that are really a transition or a jump from what's available. I mean, clearly, there are lots of people doing collaboration tools. There are lots of people doing screen sharing tools. There are people who have, walls that you can do video walls on. But when I walked in the Nureva booth and they showed me the HDL300 conferencing system, the audio and the capability of the system to capture people wherever they were in the room and effectively clarify the communication of the room so it literally, for someone who's not in the room, can have an audio experience that essentially replicates what's in the room. I found that to be very transformational because I think it addresses one of the key underlying challenges and issues we have today. So we're going to talk a bit about the technology, but to understand how it is, what I'd like to do is ask us to run a little quick video that'll show you a demonstration of the experience you would get if you were outside of a room from someone inside a room using the HDL3000 audio system.
My name is Adrian, and I'm here today to introduce you to Nureva's HDL300 audio conferencing system. It's powered by an innovation in audio technology called Microphone Mist. To ensure you're heard from anywhere in the room, Microphone Mist fills your meeting space with 8,192 virtual microphones. You might not realize this, but what you're hearing is the audio being captured by Skype through the HDL300. You're hearing exactly what a remote participant would hear. You can imagine that in a scenario like this, I would need to go from group to group, hand out materials, make sure that ideas are being discussed. As I move about the room, a traditional audio system would have a hard time keeping up with me. That's because it's designed to cover just the area it's set up in. It's static. The HDL300 lets me be confident that I can be heard by the remote participants. I can address people at table 1 and at table 2, and even directly engage my remote participants. Right now you can see I'm sitting about 25 feet away from the HDL300, and thanks to the virtual microphones, it has no problem picking up my voice. No need for me to speak unnaturally or change the way I talk. A traditional audio system would have a hard time keeping up unless there was a boundary mic somewhere near me. Thanks to the virtual microphones, I can be confident that I'm heard no matter where I am in the room. Thanks to the HDL300's microphone mist, I'm free to walk about the room. I can engage with a participant here. I can speak to someone personally here. I am confident that there are always a few mics around to capture whatever it is I'm saying. I can keep moving around the room freely. I can pace and do all of the things I would normally do to make a presentation great for the people in the room. And now, thanks to the HDL300, the remote participants as well.
That was a great demo because I love the way it shows how you can move around the room. In fact, what really impressed me when at Enterprise Connect was I saw a similar demo where I was listening on the show floor through a headphone, actually using Skype for Business as the communication modality. And the person on the other end actually walked into the corner of the room, and I could still hear them clearly. And I was very impressed with that because I've lived through being a telecommuter for most of the aughts since about 2000. I've lived through countless meetings where I couldn't understand what was being said. So with that, I'd like to introduce David Martin. David is going to talk to us a bit first about Nureva, and then we're going to talk a bit about the HDL300 and what makes it so unique. So, David, tell us a little bit about Nureva, obviously a company you founded, and kind of what your focus is as a company.
Thank you, Phil. A good background, actually, to the problem that we took on solving some 3 years ago. Nureva is founded in 2014. My wife, Nancy Knowlton, and I have a long history of working together at Smart Technologies over the last 30 years. And we took a small team of people and said, how can we solve, what are the problems that need solving, and what are the things we can go about in new ways of solving those problems? So we currently have about 100 people located in 2 locations in Canada, Calgary and Ottawa, and focused on a global market and focused on bringing new audio solutions to that market. We're currently introducing our audio product with general availability. So we'll be showing that at InfoComm coming up in Orlando in a couple of weeks. And anyone that's perhaps on the call that wants to experience that directly, that would be a good example of a place you could go to actually witness and hear the result.
One of the things that's obviously clear from this is that Nureva started by also looking at how to do wall presentations. So you're really familiar with that concept of the dynamic meeting room. So this is the HDL300, and for those of you that were watching the video, you probably noticed that big sound bar sitting on top of above the monitors in the room, and that is the HDL300. So David, just kind of. When I first saw it, I said, wow, it looks like a big sound bar, but I think it's a lot more than a big sound bar. There's some really exciting technology that's been developed that's in the product.
Our engineering team really have a background in digital radio frequency technology, and over the last 30 years have developed a variety of different ways in which data could be transferred over radio frequency. So we took that team and said, we have this other frequency problem called audio. What are the ways in which we could address that? So in that speaker bar, we have a floating an FPGA system that does lots of dedicated processing of the acoustics that are going on in the room. So we've really built a digital platform in that particular device, connected to a very simple breakout box that does some further processing, but then connects very simply to your via USB to your personal computer, whether it be a Mac or Windows PC, so that it shows up as simply an audio device.
So essentially, what you can, any device that's a USB, whether it be a codec room system, your personal computer, or even a small processor that's being used for video, can be connected to the HDL3000. So it doesn't require any special technology from that perspective.
Yes, that's right. In the breakout box, we have ways of connecting by USB, but also line in, line out with 3.5 millimeter standard analog connections that allow us to connect to a variety of different systems, like standard room video conferencing systems.
So one thing I noticed is that there's a remote. Do you need to use the remote often? Do you have to configure things with the remote, or what's the remote for there?
So first of all, in configuration, the system is fully self-configuring and self-calibrating. So the remote is simply for the user to select volume up, volume down, and perhaps mute. We don't tend to see people using that very often, but in fact, it's because it's a standard audio device in Windows or Mac. You can go to the software that you would normally use to select those same three functions: mute, volume up, volume down.
So what that essentially says is in most rooms you can just use the capabilities that are in the application in the machines themselves to manage audio, and you really don't need a remote control. Well, that's super. And so one of the other things I did notice was that it's using PoE for power, so you actually don't even have to run a power connection to it. You can just get power from PoE.
That's right. You can either, included with the product is a wall plug that will plug into that breakout box, but you can also, of course, plug in power over Ethernet into that as well, since it has that capability. So it's a very simple 50-foot cable from Ethernet cable from the breakout box to the speaker and microphone. So data is transferred over that 50-foot cable, going from the microphones that are in the system to the breakout box and thus to the computer, or from the computer to the speakers located over that same data channel, and of course power also over that same connection.
So that really does simplify installation then. So talk a bit about the innovation here, because clearly, whilst it looks like a big sound bar, there's a lot more technology going on inside of here. So I know you called this microphone mist. I look at it as how it kind of works with beamforming, but describe a little bit about how you're able to actually identify and isolate sound to different locations in the room.
So in the speaker and microphone bar, we have a variety of omnidirectional MEMS microphones. But the processing power is the trick to how to take omnidirectional microphones and be able to locate virtual microphones in an XY coordinate basis at different locations in the room. So if you and I were in the same room, for instance, and you were by the door and I was by the window, we can actually differentiate that you're by the door and I'm by the window. So we call that location-based audio. And the microphone that is closest to you will be the microphone that will essentially enable. And so we were trying to get the microphone, the virtual microphone, within 1 centimeter of where you're actually speaking. So we're very, very precise about where you are in the room and have the ability of being able to determine that's the amplification we want to do. That's where you want to do acoustic echo cancellation. We want to cancel out perhaps the other sounds in the room, not totally, because we still want to be able to have people have a great natural experience, but at the same time we're able to enhance the audio that's coming from that particular XY location in the room.
So how does that differ from, we hear a lot about, beam shaping and beam forming microphones, and, been a number of products that's part of what how is what you're doing different than that?
So I think the key is the words that I used was XY location in an actual space. So beamforming utilizes a vector-based approach to say, in this direction at this angle, I'm hearing someone speak. So classic beamforming is taking quite a bit different approach. And then as a second person, starts speaking, it needs to switch from that particular vector to a new vector. And so, and it's not telling you where along that vector that particular person is speaking. So it's a different approach.
So essentially, the beam forming, if you think about it, if you've got X number of essentially angles from the front of the room that you can pick a slice or an angular slice, what you're actually doing is you're taking advantage of this extraordinary amount of processing to actually figure out the intersection point of those microphones to figure the distance as well. So you're adding distance in addition to angle, which allows you to, instead of having, 16 or 24 angular slice of the room, to have this, over 8,000, individual points that you can identify. So that's why it takes so much processing, I'm assuming.
Yes, I think the last bullet point on this slide says simultaneous echo cancellation. And when we first introduced this at InfoComm last year, people said, well, you can't simultaneously do echo cancellation on all of the sounds in the room. And we said, yes, you can. You can because we have enough processing power to be able to do that.
That's very interesting. So actually, this chart I thought was very interesting. I think it takes a little explanation. This is actually a view of what the audio map, the sound map or heat map looks like in a room for an HDL300, and describe a little bit what we're seeing here, because I think it's very interesting to understand that this is actually identifying not only all the sounds, but which ones are important and which ones should be, echo noise reduced, etc.
Yes, essentially, think about this as a way of representing what happens over the course of let's say, a 30-minute conference call. And we try and differentiate different filters here so that the red filters are more important perhaps than the blue filtered circles. We call the circles actually bubbles because they're floating in essentially three-dimensional space and allows us to be able to know where someone is more actively speaking. So the HDL300, for instance, is at the top of this slide. And is listening simultaneously to all of the voices that are being spoken, and is able to direct the algorithms to that particular location and calculate, given the speed of sound, how far away that person is and how to do the acoustic echo cancellation on all of the sounds simultaneously.
It's very interesting. So we're saying a small fraction of the virtual microphones, but in this specific meeting, those were the ones that were actually active. So, what's really interesting about this is that the white space is actually all of the room where it wasn't being listened to. And so you can actually see this capability to identify where the key speakers are and actually use those virtual microphones that are close to them. So, again, I think it's a very interesting view of how this technology really works and what it does. So, I think the benefits here are clear. If you look at the demo, it's this concept that no matter where you are in the room, you can be captured. One of the things I guess I'd ask David, you've used the system a bit. Does it change? Do you find, when you've used it or when you've watched people adopt it, does it enable people to change the way they work in a room?
I think a few things we have observed. The first is that we're having a more natural experience. And what I mean by that is we feel that we're all co-located. We are able to interrupt someone in the room, but we can also have the remote person interrupt us when they're in the room. It's a full duplex solution. But we're also speaking more naturally. We're not having to put emphasis and raise our voice, because over a 3-hour meeting or perhaps even an 8-hour meeting, when we're moving around and trying to solve a complex problem, there's strain in that whole process. And so being able to have just a very natural conversation no matter where you are and have that picked up becomes a more natural experience and is something that's different than when you're having audio problem. I think one of the best examples in some of your earlier slides talked about the second row of people that are not seated at the table and farther away from the microphones. And those people are always anticipating when they're going to be called on so that they can jump up and get closer to the microphone. Well, you don't have to do that in this case.
Right. And I think the last bullet point here on benefits is really the most important, which is, we find in many cases remote participants stop being engaged. They get frustrated. They can't hear the whole conversation. They can't follow the flow of the conversation, and you lose engagement. And that really begins to negate the whole value of, these communication tools. And in fact, I think the interesting question here is, if you look at the HDL300, its audio capabilities both to capture what's in the room, present what's being done remote. Are we really beginning to reach the limitation where the limitation is now the communication platform itself, the UC platform? Is that more of a limitation than the in-room experience with this technology?
Well, there are certainly some things that you can imagine improving the standard UC&C clients today. So as an example, our product, when we created it, has technology that allows us to differentiate where you are in the room and place you in this three-dimensional space. So I can always listen to you out of my left ear because the speakers that are built into the product will always direct you, your voice, to the left part of the speakers. But unfortunately, not very many UC&C clients support stereo, as an example. So we've decided to turn that off for the first version. It's something we can turn on simply with a software setting a little bit later. But that's an example of something that needs, now that the technology is more robust and more capable, perhaps the software needs to catch up.
That's very interesting, because having had some experience with spatial audio in the past, one of the things that, in a conversation where you don't have a speaker token that gets passed, where multiple people can talk, the ability to isolate those in a spatial way, so the speakers are separated by an angle when you hear them, actually allows a lot better communication and understanding. So maybe, again, very effective in some of those brainstorming meetings, but something we'll have to look for from the manufacturers. I guess the other question then is, do these benefits apply across the board? So, clearly you work with Skype. What about other, video vendors, for example, Polycom and Cisco? If people are looking at installing a video system, is it easy to include an HDL300 in one of those deployments? Is this something you just add on instead of buying an expensive microphone array that has to be, installed and calibrated, and maybe somebody has to come back every 3 months or every time you rearrange the room to recalibrate the microphones? Can the HDL300 replace those in a room very easily?
It takes. We have a video on our website that a number of people with the early version of the product have utilized to understand how to install it. And it's, I think, a 5-minute video or something like that. The system only weighs 15 or 16 pounds, so it's easy for one person to install on 2 screws on the wall, as you see in this particular picture. And you might spend a little bit more time getting the cable to the system because you may want to hide the cable through the roof or something like that. But 30 minutes, you should be all done. Plug into your personal computer, whether it's one you brought with you or one that is in the actual room. It's simply recognized as a USB Windows audio or Mac audio device. And it starts up, and with 8 seconds, it auto-calibrates. Understands what's going on in the room in terms of acoustics and reverberation, is able to, from that particular point, be able to continually calibrate. So if more people come into the room, then it automatically recognizes that and adjusts the algorithms for that. You did ask the question about standard video conferencing systems, perhaps from Polycom or Cisco Tamberg. Instead of plugging into a USB connector into the PC, in this case you'll run standard audio cables into the breakout box and adjust the video conferencing systems from there. There are some tricks, it's my understanding, to adjust the the standard shipping video conferencing systems, and I suggest you rely upon your systems integrator or resellers to making those changes on those systems.
Absolutely. So in kind of looking at this continuation of some of the benefits, I think this whole concept of keeping the work surfaces clear. I've been in rooms where they have, a microphone for each seat, and by the time you get done, the table is covered with microphones and potentially cables and other things. So, I mean, clearly that's an advantage. And I think the other thing that you noted earlier, and I want to emphasize, because sometimes as communications people, we don't really think about this, the ability to power the unit from a simple Ethernet cable and making that single PoE cable connection to the unit actually is a great benefit, because what it does is allows you to run a wire through the plenum without having all the issues of having a conduit, et cetera, that you typically have for power. I mean, installing power is typically a fairly major activity. So, I mean, again, I think this goes down to that ease of installation. It's even though it's a very complex product in what it does, it actually seems very easy to install and easy to manage.
That was a very, very important part of our design considerations, for sure.
Yep, absolutely. So, I guess one of the questions that's going to come is, what types of rooms are ideal for the system? Is it kind of what's the maximum sized room that you would see it being effective in?
So it's designed for small rooms, 8 feet by 8 feet in size, up to rooms, medium-sized rooms of 20 feet by 20 feet. Having tried it out in a variety of rooms that are in fact larger, we're very comfortable saying that it will work very well in larger rooms up to that 30 by 30 foot size. This is the first of a family of products from Nureva, and so we're thinking about even larger rooms from there, and thinking about our roadmap and where we can most be effective in terms of solving problems within different environments. So
really, it's you can apply it to any room where you want to have that capability to have essentially motion within the room. So I guess that this is a good time we kind of talk about the rooms that it fits in. The price point, the retail price point for an HDL300 is
$3,000.
$3,000. So, and it's interesting, when I first heard that, I thought, well, that's more expensive than most microphone systems. But when you think about really the cost of a conference facility, it's a very interesting perspective that by the time you get done buying the monitor, potentially video equipment, potentially a wall display that's a touchscreen display or a smart board, the cost of equipping that room is typically in the multi-thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars. So, again, what we're talking about here, we need to always remember that regardless of how you use the room, whether you're going to use that room as as simply a conference space, a conversation space with people remote, whether you're going to do video conferencing, whether you're going to do presentations, whether you're going to do shared editing, whether you're going to do brainstorming, all of those activities require quality audio. And I think this flexibility to use the room effectively, regardless of the collaboration tools of today and tomorrow, makes it a real fundamental and sound investment in the room. So that's why I think personally this is, even though at $3,000 it sounds like more than many of the basic microphones, when you compare it, for example, to an array mic of ceiling microphones that have to be installed, have to be calibrated, it actually becomes very inexpensive for what it's doing and being even more effective. So with that,
Bill,
I think
just add to that if I could. But I thought
Sure.
it was really interesting. Earlier today we had an analyst briefing with someone on the East Coast, and he said, well, I'm going to mute my microphone on my end because I'm going to be working on my keyboard, and I don't want that to be distracting to the conversation. by putting the microphone up on the wall, that problem it goes away, and you don't have to worry about, oh, now that I've asked you to respond, you then have to unmute, and quite often we discover people don't do that very easily. So, another way of changing the way things are done and the way in which people work. But also above and beyond that, how many times have you been in a meeting where you're talking with someone globally, someone perhaps in Asia? In electronic products today, we spend a lot of time sourcing products and working with engineering teams in Asia. English, in their case, may not be their first language, and picking up on the nuances of what they're saying. Did they really say yes, or did they say maybe when they answered the question? So the nuances, I think, is another example of why this product has come up to be so successful and appreciated.
Absolutely. I mean, and going back to our, at the very beginning, our slides about the fact that, only a small percentage are actually the words. It's how it's said, the intonation, and that becomes doubly true when it's an important business conversation, I think. It's absolutely very important. And again, that foundation aspect of audio, we tend to get excited by all these new tools and things you can do, but we always have to come back to that they really are operating on top of our ability to talk to each other and discuss the key salient points. So some final thoughts here as we go to some questions. Audio is the foundation of effective collaboration. If you don't do a good job on audio in your room, it doesn't matter how much you spend on tools or what you build in the room. Your effectiveness of your communications, your collaboration, your activities will be dramatically reduced. And this will definitely show up in frustration for remote users. And that's really important because remote work and group problem solving, integrating remote people is not going to go away. I mean, clearly one of the trends we're seeing more and more is that you have to hire people where you find them. We have, I think it's 5 million open jobs in North America that are jobs where the skills that are required are in relatively low availability. So if you can find someone who has the right skills to help your company move forward, you probably have to bring them in right where they are. Your ability to tell people where they live and where they work is being reduced for those critical resources. So the ability to have remote workers and have them effectively part of your organization is critical. And then I think the final point here is, one of the challenges we've had with audio is you had really two choices. You had a fairly simple speakerphone on the table, maybe with a couple of additional mics that, picked up everybody who was sitting at the table, or alternatively, you could put some ceiling mics in the room and spend thousands of dollars on calibration and have a potentially more effective audio experience, but not even covering the whole room. So I think the ability to have something that can be installed literally in minutes, it's a very easy installation. Even the wiring installation is simple. Combining that with the high-quality audio really comes together to create a transformational way we can deliver value of our collaboration platforms. So with that, I'd like to jump to some questions, and I'll throw it back to Michelle because I think she's got some questions queued up for David and myself.
I do. Thank you. An excellent presentation, both you and David. Really informative. So as we begin with the Q&A today, I just want to ask the audience if you could please fill out the feedback form that's open on your console. To complete the form, please press the submit answer button at the bottom of the page. And now on to the Q&A portion of our event. As a reminder, to participate in the Q&A, just type your question into the Ask a Question text area, then click the Submit button. I have seen a handful of questions coming in throughout the presentation. I have a good one, I think, for Phil to start off with. The question is, my company is looking to replace old Polycom analog phones soon, but won't be able to tackle reconfiguring for dedicated room PCs, appliances for some time. If not this tool, any others?
Well, I think, if you're looking at analog phones, clearly that's, a challenge for a couple of reasons. One, obviously, analog phone lines have lower quality, but analog devices are limitations. There are analog devices, phones, that do have audio inputs and outputs. You can do that essentially often through the same jacks that you would use for headphones. So one thing that may be interesting to look at, and I'd kind of leave this to David, and it may take a little bit of design, would be, can you use an HDL300 with as essentially a headphone connected speaker to one of those, an analog phone in a room. There also are some other interesting options of, potentially using in those rooms just a simple device like a Nook as a collaboration device. It's actually a Nook is a fairly inexpensive way to add a collaboration capability to the room. And of course, the final thing, and this is probably for a lot of us something we really should consider, is doing your room with what I refer to as the BYOP, bring your own processor implementation. So rather than leave a Polycom phone on the table, you may want to leave that there as an analog line, but connect up a resources in the room. Could be a camera, might be an HDL300 up on the wall. Connect those through a USB hub. I think you can actually use the one that comes with the HDL300. And now you provide a USB port on the table that I can walk into the room, plug my PC in, and run on my PC the application that I want to collaborate with. And the advantage to this is, A, there's very low cost. You're not investing in equipment for the room that's dedicated to the room and may, in fact, become obsolete over time. You're actually dependent upon the user bringing their own equipment in. But the other thing that I think is really important to think about is more and more we're being invited to conversations that are not necessarily hosted in our own enterprise. And I think this is a trend that's going to accelerate very much over the next couple of years as all of the collaboration tools are implementing the capability to invite guests. If you're in Skype for Business, you can use the web Skype client. If you're in Spark from Cisco, you can use a browser and just join a Spark meeting as a guest. We're seeing the same thing from virtually every vendor is building in this guest capability. That combined with, commercial products like Zoom and BlueJeans, what that means is that more and more when you're invited to a meeting, you may be invited to a meeting that is being hosted in a collaboration platform that's not your internal platform, but the platform of the person who's hosting the meeting. So this ability to just walk in and join, I think it's a very cost-effective way of doing it. And what it allows you to do is implement something in that room that really doesn't impact your long-term value. So, for example, if you decide a year from now or 2 years from now to put a Nook in every one of those rooms, you don't change any of the equipment that's in the room. You just connect it to the Nook. So you're basically investment protected in that kind of a decision. David, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, Phil, I do. I think for Scott's question, what we've done is tested the use of the HDL300 by going into that headset jack that is on the bottom side of that Polycom analog phone, but also available on some of the other phones, such as the old Nortel, Meridian Northstar. Those voice over IP digital phones, whether they be from Avaya, Nortel, Cisco, all have a headset jack, and the HDL plugs into that particular RJ11 jack quite nicely and goes into the 3.5 millimeter line in, line out capabilities in the breakout box. I think what we'll do for that question is refer to our website, Nureva.com, and we'll have a frequently asked question answer there for people like Scott who's trying to sort out how he transitions from analog phones to perhaps a new world.
Yep. And clearly one of the things you can do is you can now replace that analog Polycom phone that's on the table with just a regular analog phone that has a headphone jack on it and integrate that very effectively. So it provides a fairly easy way to do that. And as you move to IP, that could be an IP phone.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got some good choices there and inexpensive.
Excellent.
All right.
Michelle, back to you.
Thank you. So the next question I have is, someone wants to know, does it or can it create a spatial audio experience on the remote site? David,
and I'll leave that to you, David. I think you started to address that, and I think you said the limitation was not really in the HDL300. It was really in the current conferencing, the current collaboration software packages that really are not designed to support stereo.
Yes, I think that having a stereo capability was really interesting for us. So we'd have one room in Calgary, one room in Ottawa, and we'd say, okay, let's turn on the stereo audio experience on, choose your favorite video audio conferencing system, whether it be Zoom or Cisco or Microsoft or perhaps one of the other systems out there. And we couldn't find a lot of the systems that had stereo, or if they had stereo capability that would carry our information across the internet. They hid it quite well. So I think that the answer to the question is it's a work in progress. Now that those companies are aware that we exist and that we have this capability, we'll be engaging with them in a variety of events coming up and talking to them directly about how to enable that and how to make that available.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent.
The next question, how susceptible is the system to RF interference?
It's not. Simple answer.
All right. Well, that's on to the next one. Okay, thank you. So the next question, I believe you already addressed this, but how long does an installation typically take?
Yeah, I think it's about 30 minutes. I think it takes people a little bit of time the first time they've experienced taking it out of the box, but all the components that you need are in the actual box. It's simply a question of deciding where you want to place it on the wall, and our video instruction tells you some good ideas about where to place it. We have a couple of cables to connect, but other than that, it's a really straightforward exercise.
Yeah, and I think it's important to emphasize that when I've talked to installers and I've had conversation with them about what takes time installing a system, running all the cables, and especially when you start running cables out to a table, you have to, provide power to something on the table. You have to run the cables to the table. You have to figure out how to get the tables from a table across the floor to the wall. Do you run them under the floor? Do you put one of those rubbery things? I mean, I think the thing that's very interesting here, by essentially focusing everything from an audio perspective on the wall, where you also have, for example, the display and video and all these other components, you actually eliminate a lot of the time complexity in an installation, which is this: how do I get all these cables from point A to point B? Now, clearly, depending upon the system you're using, you may have that because of other reasons. For example, if you're using, the Skype for Business room system, where you actually have a Surface tablet that has to go on the table, you don't eliminate that. But if you look at a lot of installations, especially in these smaller and huddle rooms, you have the ability to both eliminate all that cabling, and that, again, going back to that single cable that's a PoE cable, that's the kind of cable that's really easy to fish wire through the wall so you don't see it, and you can, typical office construction where you've got a drop ceiling, it's very easy to pull the tile out, punch a hole at the top of the wall, run a wire down to get behind the television or behind the HDL300 and pull the wire out. And because it's basically in the wall plenum wiring PoE, you don't have the complexity and cost of a conduit and wiring 110 or 220 volt electrical. So I think those things all together reduce the labor content dramatically of an installation.
And Phil, I think the carry-on to that is, did I successfully install it? And because it's a standard audio device, from the operating system point of view, you can bring up those tools that are part of the system. Maybe you don't have someone, after work to be able to connect with on Skype for Business or whatever conferencing product. But if it's playing sounds through the speakers If it's seeing the recording of your voice, you know that it's functioning and working. And sometimes troubleshooting your installation takes as much time as the installation. So it is really a straightforward installation, and you're pretty confident when you're all done that it's working.
Absolutely. And I think, again, this, the not having a calibration, having been through calibrations in rooms and actually calibrations of audio systems where you have to, put microphones in 7 or 8 different places and run test tones and adjust the system. Not having that is actually very significant in terms of the quality, getting that real quality across the entire room.
All right, well, and let's talk about the entire room. So we have a question come in that in the video that you showed earlier, it said someone commented that it appeared much longer than a 20-foot by 20-foot room. So we want to know, what is the max size room that the HDL300 would still work in?
So designed for 20 feet by 20 feet, and that's what you'll find on our product sheet. What we're realizing is that some rooms, like that particular one that's in the video, is closer to 28 feet by 38 feet, I believe. But it acoustically is got some sound treatment. It's got a few things that not every room would have. So instead of having windows on one wall, it has windows that have window shades on them, which absorb some of the acoustics. So we're a little cautious. It's a new product. We don't know exactly what size of room would be the max size. We're very comfortable recommending it for a 20-foot by 20-foot room, and happy to help support somebody who'd like to try it out in a larger room, as an example, because that's the type of data we'd love to have, is to see whether it works there as well. Our feeling is it actually would work in a larger room, but we don't have enough data to be able to put on our spec sheet at this point.
Well, I love the data-driven approach you're taking with this here. I have one more question I think we can get to before time runs out. We made a bunch of mentions of various unified communications platforms and services throughout this presentation. But of the main UC&C platforms, are there ones that the HDL300 works better with, or ones that are more of a challenge?
No, if you had asked me 6 months ago what the answer to that question, I would have said, well, some of the software systems do a better job if we're not handling some feature, automatic gain control, acoustic echo cancellation. Some of them have a deeper capability there, but we've improved our algorithms right across the whole range of algorithms that are required to have a good audio conferencing experience. So irrespective of whether it's from Microsoft or from Google or from Cisco or from Zoom or any of the other well-recognized UC&C clients, we're very happy to say that it absolutely functions well, and you couldn't tell the difference on one of those software applications versus another with our system as the microphone pickup and or speaker.
And I think, Michelle, very important to note that, echo canceling and this dynamic echo canceling across all the microphones is an incredibly powerful value in terms of clarifying what people on the other end hear. Echo is one of those things that it's introduced in one device and tends to be heard in every other device on a conference call. So you have to have this where you have echo, and all of a sudden you've got to figure out who's giving the echo. So I think this concept of doing this very active, multidimensional echo cancellation in the room is a key part of really improving that experience for the remote users. So I think that's a very important point, and why, again, it works very well regardless of what the underlying communication is, whether it's a simple point-to-point phone call or a very intense video-based collaboration experience, because it's really capturing in the best way that audio experience that's in the room and translating it for the remote users and then the remote users back into the room.
Well, thank you very much for your comments to both of you. You gave some great responses to these questions. That pretty much brings us to the end of our hour. So I just want to invite our audience, if you're looking for more information, please visit the resource links that are open on your screen in front of you. Thank you to everyone for attending today's webinar, Meeting the Needs of the Dynamic Meeting Room, brought to you by Enterprise Connect, Nureva Inc., and UBM. Shortly after the live event, we will send you an email reminder to access this presentation on demand. This webinar is copyright 2017 by UBM. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted, if that is the case, by Enterprise Connect and Nureva Inc., who are solely responsible for its content, and individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. On behalf of our guest, Phil Edholm, President and Principal at PKE Consulting, and David Martin, Co-founder, Chairman, and Chief Technology Officer at Nureva Inc., thank you all very much for your time, and have a great day.